104.7 The Cave, KKLH, Marshfield, Springfield, a proud member of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
Touchdown, Kansas City!
Now, it's time for Ned Talk.
If you were tuning in expecting to hear some crazy guy with long hair singing, you're out of luck. You got the three of us. It's Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, your local live sports talk show brought to you by The Dive on Patent. I'm Joe Westen, the Wrangler. Ned Reynolds, he is the legend. Alex Scott, he is the only member of the B team that is with us today. Let's start out talking about the Chiefs' performance last week against the Vikings. Your thoughts, Ned?
Well, I thought that Kansas City did what they had to do to get a win. The Vikings, and I'll tell you who won it, it's the defense. Kansas City's defense was absolutely spectacular. They didn't necessarily shut down Kirk Cousins, but they did a good job of holding him at bay, so to speak. I thought there were some interesting calls in the game, but it really didn't make any really significant difference except down the stretch. However, be that as it may, Kansas City deserved to win it and played the better game, and defense took Cousins right out of it with that constant disruption that Kansas City specializes in. It was a very good performance for them.
What'd you think, Alec?
I felt almost bad for Minnesota right out the gate because the whole pregame was they just got to cut down these turnovers. They're shooting themselves in the foot with these turnovers in the very first play, 10, 12-yard gain, and he fumbles. And that's the Vikings Vikinging their way to a defeat. I do think Kansas City looked like the better team on the field. I also do not think that any referee decision swayed the outcome of that game, but I do think it's a bad look for the NFL when a referee's looking at the Chiefs player with his helmet off and going, "Put your helmet back on, or I'll have to flag you."
That is completely unacceptable because the rule is specific. Matter of fact, it's been about, I guess, 10 or 11 years ago. That cost the Cleveland Browns the game against Kansas City. They had the Chiefs beaten. 1 second to go, player took his helmet off on the field and waved it around. Penalty right there, gave the Chiefs another chance and kicked a winning field goal. And happened in Cleveland. Again, the rule's the rule. You don't tell him to put the hat on. He should know that.
It has been interesting so far this season, and I was thinking about it on the way here. I was thinking, the Chiefs are playing very much like they did last season, and they're kind of maddening because they're a better team than the way they look on the field, but they do enough to win. And that's kind of the way they played last week or last year.
You can't argue that point, but again, it's subjective on the way that we watch it. That may be the impression that they're out there to win, and they're out there doing their best. I am of the opinion, in the case of the Minnesota Vikings, they changed their defense, and they did some switching in the defensive backfield that I think upset Mahomes a little bit. But again, it does give that impression that they've got their foot halfway down the pedal and they don't want to put it all the way down. I'm not sure that is the case.
What do you think, Alec?
I think a win's a win. That's the first thing you got to get your head around.
Well, you're a Steelers fan. You would say that.
A win is a win. Well, that was an ugly win for my Steelers this week too. It is just ugly football, but Kansas City plays not as ugly a football, but finds ways to win. It helps whenever, Justin Jefferson pulling his hamstring and having to leave midway through that game. You catch them a little flat-footed because they're planning on their all-world receiver being out there when he's not. But, if your team shows up and plays just well enough to beat the guy across from them, then you'll take that every single week. And, the offense will find it. They had to deal with a Kelsey injury themselves where he missed a bit of time in that game before coming back in and looking pretty good. So they made the right adjustments. Coaching and players came out on top against what we think is an inferior Vikings team.
Let's talk about Travis Kelce for just a second. He will play tonight, but it didn't look good when he went down in that game against the Vikings.
No, and it was a non-contact injury, and that's never a positive thing when that happens. His foot slipped, and he obviously stretched the tendons and the ligaments and so forth and so on, but he's a pro athlete, and you have to understand, too, that these pro trainers, it's different from going to the emergency room for a civilian and so on. I hurt my ankle. Okay, don't worry about it. Well, with the pros, they have specific methods for perhaps helping the injury, or helping, I should say, the healing of the injury with the ice and the heat and the ice and the heat and the constant treatment. So they get them healed up pretty quickly, especially when your paycheck depends on it.
You're looking at the Chiefs, and we've talked about how fortunate that they've been with injuries. And George Karlaftis is also a little banged up. Do you know if he's going to play tonight or not?
Well, he is. It's questionable, and Kelsey's questionable too, which is that's the football terminology to a game time decision. Well, Karlaftis, if he's not too badly slowed up by that hamstring, he'll be in there, and I'm sure Kelsey will be too. He may not start. Yeah, after all, you've got some pretty good Noah Gray, and there is certainly a more than capable tight end.
Blake Bell, yeah, too.
And keep in mind, and Blake Bell as well. Or keep in mind, the Chiefs are a 10.5-point favorite. They're which in pro circles is overwhelming. Do you want to risk the health of a star player in a game like this that you're probably going to win? No. We'll see. He'll play, but it probably won't be all that much.
You cannot understate the impact that George Karlaftis has had this season. I think he's in the top 5 in quarterback pressures. I mean, you're not seeing the sack numbers, but you're seeing him put the pressure on the quarterback that's allowing maybe Mike Dana get through or Chris Jones. So you're seeing those things happen. But you can't understate how important this guy is in his second year, Alec.
Well, that is, excuse me for interrupting, but that is the concept that the Chiefs have on defense. It isn't necessarily to sack, it's to disrupt. That's what they did last week with Kirk Cousins. Took him right out of his rhythm, and you saw was he 29 of 47? That says it right there. They're not pro numbers, and that indicates you're being disrupted out of your rhythm. And when that happens, they have succeeded.
And pressures, those are things that don't always show up in the everyday stat sheet that you look at. You want to look at those sacks numbers. T.J. Watt leading the league in sacks, and that's very exciting. But when you really dig into it, you might not get the sack, but did you rush the throw? Did you lead to an errant throw that was an incompletion or a turnover, which is better than a sack if you get there? So having someone on that line who just even adds more to that squeeze on the quarterback is invaluable. But you made the point, Ned. This is the Broncos. That we just saw a 15-game losing streak against the Chiefs are the Broncos, and on a short week. If you got anybody who's mildly banged up, if they don't play tonight, you give them 2 full weeks. Basically, give them a bye week to get healthy. Wouldn't be shocked if any of these guys are on a quote-unquote pitch count.
We always talk about any given Sunday. It's Thursday today, by the way. Do you think there's a chance tonight for the Broncos?
Always a chance. Always a chance. In boxing terminology, it's a puncher's chance. They are not a knockout team by any stretch of the imagination. Russell Wilson, who had a great career, but he certainly is not having a resurgence of that career with Denver. And the fact is, it's just simply not a very good team. They have no offensive line at all. Wilson's having to run for his life. And let's face it, guys, when you're compromised up front, both defensively and offensively, you're not going to win. You have to have the horses up there. Kansas City does, Denver does not.
Have you watched Denver at all this year, Alec?
I haven't sat and really watched it, but observing their game, I will say with Sean Payton there and the new offensive system, Russ does look better. Russ actually is putting up respectable numbers. It's just a matter of it's not translating to wins. Now, I don't care how good your quarterback plays if your defense allows 70 points in the Miami game. It doesn't matter what you do. You're not competing with 70. So I do think the Chiefs defense, they can't sleep on it because the Denver offense has played pretty well. And if they let them play pretty well and the Chiefs put out a lethargic performance, there is a chance.
I think you make a good point too with the receivers they have. Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton are certainly quality receivers, but they have not performed to capability. And I think one of the reasons for that is that Wilson, while he has had some time, is still not tuned in to what they're doing yet. And even though he's been there over a year, it just is not a rhythmic situation for the Broncos.
You're listening to Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show. It's brought to you by The Dive on Patton Street, the best place to take in the Chiefs games downtown. Ned Reynolds, Joe Westen, Alex Scott. We're discussing the Chiefs and the Broncos tonight. We're kind of on the Broncos right now. I saw an article this week that said that the Broncos have been – now, you can take this any way you want to. I know you're kind of a devil's advocate guy, Ned, But apparently the Broncos have already been listening to phone calls on trade talks for some of their receivers. Are they in rebuilding mode already?
Well, I can't imagine that at this stage of the season they're 1-4. So that's admitting defeat and throwing up the white flag. I can't imagine that's the case, no. Maybe 1-10. Yeah, I can see that happening then. But no, I just can't buy that now.
But if you're Sean Payton and maybe you get there and you realize that I don't have the horses I want to do what I want to do, maybe you do kind of tank it a little bit.
Don't know what kind of influence he has with the front office. The front office is a new one, and this is what the second year, I think, under the new Walmart ownership. It's the Walmart family that purchased it. And don't know what their thinking is. We don't have that kind of insight like we do with the Chiefs, the pretty good pipeline into what Kansas City's thinking. But in Denver's case, you've got to go by the record, and they're not playing very well.
Yeah, they maybe should get rid of these receivers right now before a price drop happens.
Well,
get that little Walmart joke there?
I got you.
All right, that was a cheap one.
Does Sutton... Do they go disguise themselves as old people and walk around in the locker room and find out what's going on? I don't think so.
Alec, a lot of talk in the offseason about Sean Payton coming in. He was very critical of the former regime, and the former regime shoved it in his face last week when they played the Jets. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I've seen they've lost their previous head coach. They lost to a former ball boy and who's now head coach of the Dolphins, and Mike McDaniel. They've lost to a former coordinator and former coach, Josh McDaniels. Mm-hmm. So they've just lost to everybody except for that one win they got. So I don't know. You make the point about the receivers maybe being for sale. I personally don't think a team can be in rebuild when you're paying the quarterback the money that they're paying. They almost don't have a choice but to keep trying to load up and go while they're paying Russell Wilson the money they're paying. However, they have already traded Randy Gregory to San Francisco, and from what I'm hearing, I've seen today that I think Frank Clark's time in Denver already about done, whether it's cut or trade. So maybe we see a little reunion in Kansas City here. Frank Clark coming.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I know that Chris Jones wants his buddy Clark back on the team, but there's the fraternal thinking here. Does that really match what Clark can do? He was. Last year, you might remember, he was victimized a number of times on defense, so I'm not sure he really has it anymore. And
but a great Super Bowl.
He did, but that's one game. And it was a big game, but the Chiefs let him go for a reason. I just can't imagine that they'd want him back. We'll see. We'll see how things work out.
So the Broncos have a Hall of Fame head coach. They have a Hall of Fame quarterback. They have some pretty decent receivers. I think they have a fairly decent running back. But the defense is, shall we say, porous at best?
Defense is ranked, I think, 29th of 32 teams in the NFL, which is rather lamentable. And you're right about the running back. Javonte Williams is a very good running back. He was All-American at North Carolina. The guy can really rock it with that football. But again, if you don't have people protecting you, you aren't going to do a thing. That's why Mahomes is so good. Mahomes is a great quarterback, folks. But he also has a pretty good line and has the rhythm of that line and the pattern and concept to be able to make it work. We've often talked about this on our show. If he was on another team, let's just say the Chicago Bears or maybe the Denver Broncos, without any protection, would he be as effective? He'd be good, but would he be great? I don't think so. You've got to have those people helping you out.
What do you think, Alec?
Yeah, I mean, Denver's just scratching their head because, they make that big trade for Russ. It looked like that was the missing piece. They had suffered from bad quarterback play ever since Peyton Manning left, and in his last year, he wasn't great either. And they thought, this is it. This is going to get us back. We still have this defense. And then slowly but surely, whether it's Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, or guys like that, they've just lost a lot of that talent on the defensive side. And this is where they're left. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to struggle so long as their defense even if you took the 70-point game off the table, the defensive stats are still not good. So it wouldn't matter if you gave them Kansas City's offense with that defense. You're still probably going to be a near 500 team because it's just hard to overcome.
When you look at the schedule, there's a little anomaly with it. You kind of don't see this very often. The NFL does a very good job of breaking up games. And the Chiefs have the Broncos in a 2-week span. They play them tonight, and then they play the Chargers next Sunday, and the following Sunday they get the Broncos again, this time in Denver. I mean, what do you think about that, Ned? I mean,
I must admit to you, I don't know how the NFL makes their schedule. It may be a computer, and it may, again, how they work and what the formula is, I don't know. Of course, you have to play certain level of teams when you finish high in the standings, and it's made, or at least it's programmed to make your schedule tougher for the contending teams, and it certainly would be for the Super Bowl champions. But again, in terms of time, it does seem like it's a pretty rapid repeat of a team on the schedule, but I don't know how that works.
Typically, we have Kevin Beatty on with us when we do our Denver show, and I think we'll have him on in 2 weeks. I think he's weeping today, so I'm not sure how optimistic fans are in Denver. I know they're pretty restless from what I've read in the media, Ned.
Well, who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
You're paying high prices for season tickets, and you're accustomed to having huge crowds at what used to be Mile High Stadium. That's a way of life out there. The Broncos always have been. They're an original AFL team. Fans identify very strongly with them, and as a result, when you have a down period, and you can, in a way, equate it to the Cardinals, the baseball Cardinals, who's accustomed to seeing your team finish in last place, 21 games under 500, and so forth and so on. It is something that you're not accustomed to, and it takes some adjustment. But you also don't want that to happen every year, year in and year out. That's not part of the scheme.
I thought you were going to bring up the Phoenix or the Arizona Cardinals and say, I think their fans are pretty accustomed to them finishing in last place. But you were talking about Denver. They're minus 60 in differential this year. That is the third worst.
Well,
Right now, looking at it, the only two teams that are worse than them, and the one that's the New York Giants, that's to be expected. They're the worst. But the other one mixed in there is the New England Patriots, and it's been a bad year for Bill Belichick and that team. So what do you think you're going to see tonight? Do you think you'll see a high-scoring affair?
Well,
or one-sided high-scoring?
You have to take a look, and you can make a comparison when the Chiefs played the Chicago Bears. There was some thought, well, the Chiefs they'll kind of take it easy with them. Well, they didn't. They won it, 42-10 or something like that, whatever the final score was, and routed the Chicago Bears. They have the capabilities of routing the Denver Broncos tonight. Whether or not that happens, who knows? It is pro football, and you do have pro athletes out there who are capable, but I really don't think Denver is capable of keeping this thing close. I don't.
What about you, Alec?
Well, backtrack a sec. I will give Denver a little props. If you have a negative 60 differential and 50 of that's from one game.
Yeah, that's right. 70 points.
Not bad for the rest of those games. But I actually do think there's going to be some fireworks tonight. I think we've seen a history of that. Last year, the Denver, especially the latter game against Denver, was a very high-scoring affair that Denver almost pulled out.
They should.
Russ has been playing better. Their defense has been playing bad, and Chiefs might come into this one with a little bit of, it's Denver, we got it. I'm expecting a fairly high-scoring game tonight.
Well, it's a short week, too, and you never know what you're going to get from your team in a short week. You just don't know how a team's going to respond, especially after a game that was a lot tougher than I think the Chiefs fans or even us would have even thought that it would have been, that game against Minnesota. So,
well, we're talking about possibilities and doing the analysis of what might happen, could happen. The realism is to look at these teams and compare them. And yes, it's only a 4-day rest and all that. It's 4-day rest for both teams, and both are coming off a very short week. Yeah, there's any number of possibilities, but the bottom line is Kansas City is superior.
All right, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about, well, I don't know, we'll figure something out to talk about. It's Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show, brought to you by The Dive. I'm Patton.
Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
35 minutes away from the Chiefs pregame show. Mitch Holtis, Dana Hughes, Dan Israel, Cast of Thousands, Art Haynes. Great to hear Art back, sounding absolutely fantastic. So glad to hear Art back doing the Chiefs pregames and the breaks and all that stuff. So just makes me feel good to hear the man. Joe Westen, Ned Reynolds, Alex Scott will get you up to the top of the hour when it all starts. Let's talk about a smattering of sports, I guess. Let's start with baseball. The division series are going pretty much the way that the wild card series went. They're pretty unexciting
and
right
fast. Now. It's like over before they started.
Yeah.
I'd laugh at you for picking Baltimore to go all the way, but I picked the Dodgers, and here we are, both teams 0-3 in the DS and already out. So
who would have thought
going in 100+ wins and pack up and go home.
How many would have picked the Diamondbacks to be in the National League Championship Series? And here they are and playing well. It's a ball club that's really kind of brought together with young players who have achieved at the right time, and it's kind of a very nice story. And the top pitcher for the Diamondbacks was here with the Springfield Cardinals in 2018, I believe it was. Zach Gallen pitched down here, and a former Cardinal. And then you have key individuals, including Corbin Carroll, who is nothing short of outstanding. He's got to be the Rookie of the Year this year, and in the postseason, he's playing remarkable baseball. That's a good team. It could be that they play, well, be the Phillies or Braves who they play, and Philadelphia has a 2-1 lead as we speak with a possible final game tonight, but we'll have to wait to see what happens there. But Arizona's a good ball club, and they've been in the World Series before. A lot of folks don't realize that, but back in the early 2000s.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about it. Mariano, don't want to talk about it. Were you surprised about Texas? I mean, they took Baltimore right out.
Texas is an outstanding baseball team. They led that division for most of the season. They faltered in the stretch. Houston took them over, and now both of them, Houston and Texas, are in the championship, in the league championship the way it should be. They're the two best teams. Baltimore, great year. I'm of the opinion they're a little bit too young to maybe have morphed into a World Series or a league championship team. They'll be back. You look at that team with the great talent, Reitzman and the big kid Gunnar Henderson. Hey, these are outstanding players, and they're going to be not that they aren't now, a very good team for a number of years.
What do you think, Alec? I mean, it's just been pretty quick as far as the baseball playoffs go.
Yeah, and I bet MLB's really disliking this happening because it's your big moment. You're in the playoffs. You're already having to compete against the NFL news outlets, and your series are just wrapping up as fast as they start. So sweeps don't do much for drama. So I'm sure MLB, they're not going to tell you, but they're pulling for Atlanta tonight to force a big Game 5 back on their home turf. But I would say the teams that have played, it's the team that's gone out has looked better throughout it. Texas and Houston, this just almost feels this is fitting. They were competing, other than Seattle creeping in there during their one hot stretch. Those two were competing in their division the whole year. I think this is a very exciting way to wrap it up and see who really is the cream of the crop of that division to go on to the World Series. And then Philly doing it again, just right place, right time, right guys coming in and trying to get hot here at the last second. And more than any other sport, it's possible in baseball. If you get those guys gelling at the right time, that means more than anything else. And
I think you're seeing a perfect example now of the wild cards being in there and the managerial circumstance in which you're getting your team to peak at the right time. Do you peak at midseason and win 101, 103 games, whatever the case might be? No. Let's get them ready for the postseason.
Ned, let me ask you about your Phillies. Okay? They're back, and as Alec pointed out, they have last year they were one game away from two games away from being world champions.
It was 6 games.
Yeah. Is this their year?
Oh, who knows? They may lose tonight. They're still playing another game to go tonight, and if they do, then they'd go back to Atlanta, and I can't see Philadelphia winning down there. But then again, they're a funny team because they have a lot of power. Hit 6 home runs in last night's game, 6. That ties a major league record. It's a franchise record for Philadelphia. But you look at what they can do and what they have, and it's a pretty good baseball team. Are they equipped to get into a World Series and win it all? Well, they're equipped to get in a World Series. They were there last year. But to win it all, that remains to be seen. They're just a number of good. Arizona, if that's who they play, is a very good baseball team.
Well, they took out the Dodgers, one of the best teams in baseball, one of the best teams record-wise in baseball, and they took them out. And You were talking about the 6 home runs that the Phillies hit. The Diamondbacks hit 4 against the Dodgers in 1 inning. 4 solo shots.
And
That's baseball.
Who did they hit him against? Lance Lynn.
Really?
Former Cardinal, yeah.
He's a guy that just keeps popping up in people's radar every
All
year.
of a sudden, you're like,
Oh,
"He's
Lance
still
Lynn.
pitching?" Well, you know, yeah.
He's still out there. Lance Lynn, he's still going. Let's talk about other sports starting up. Hockey dropped the puck already on its season. Alec, you're going to St. Louis this weekend.
Yep.
Check out the Blues.
Going to see the Blues versus Kraken on Saturday. Be in the house. Looking forward to it. Repping a Blues hoodie tonight just to get in the spirit because the Blues open their season tonight as well. So they're on the road, but we're looking forward to getting hockey up and going. It's a great time of year with playoff baseball, NFL, hockey kicking off, NBA. It's just a lot of fun.
Kind of splits your allegiance a little bit. Yet now you're not necessarily a Chiefs diehard. You're more of a Pittsburgh Steelers one. But the Chiefs will be on, and then you'll have the St. Louis Blues playing the Dallas Stars. And there's one thing that neither one of you will watch that I will, and that's Philadelphia-Atlanta tonight.
No, I probably will watch Philadelphia and Atlanta tonight.
Be a little
I admitted to you,
picture. It's gonna be.
I slept on these. I looked and I was like, that's over already? Because I really was excited to watch a little bit of Baltimore, Texas, and I saw that, a couple of well-pitched games, and then there was, I think, a dog mixed in the middle of that. But, these are going really quickly. And it's hard to believe, we're clicking through October really fast. We'll be at World Series time before you know it. And then college football will get really serious with the polls, and then basketball will be going full tilt. We'll be talking about Missouri State basketball. Let's talk about Missouri State football for just a second because they have a big test this weekend.
This is an interesting one, too, because it's the very last time that they'll play Western Illinois. That team is moving out of the Missouri Valley and going to the Ohio Valley next year. And with the Missouri Valley schedule being the way it is, you have a chance to play non-conference teams, but I can't imagine that long-time series ever being reestablished again. Anyway, the Bears play Western Illinois looking for their first win of the year, period. The Bears already do have a win over Utah Tech, but they're looking for their first conference win. Neither team's a playoff candidate this year. Western's rather weak. They're young. They're a very young football team, and the new coach up there has recruited to advance into another conference. So it's taking them a while to get their pattern and their whole concept of football down. This is a good win for the Bears if they can come up with that, and I think they will. Their quarterback has done well. He's a sub-quarterback, Jordan Pashot. He's subbing for the individual who's out now, Clark, for the rest of the year. And the Pashot kid, who's a junior college All-America, is, in fact, a very good QB. So if the Bears can get their offense going and play reasonable defense, which they can, they should get a win tomorrow, or on Saturday, I should say.
It's hard to figure out what day of the week it is, isn't it? With football on Thursday night and with it streaming. Come on, let's get rid of this streaming thing. Let's put it back on TV. It's Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show, brought to you by The Dive on Patton.
Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave. A proud member of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
About 21 minutes away from the start of the Chiefs pregame show right here on your home for the Kansas City Chiefs in Southwest Missouri, 104.7 The Cave. It's Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show, brought to you by The Dive on Patton. I'm Joe Westen, joined by Ned Reynolds, Alex Scott. We are discussing sports. That is what we do. That is what is in the memo line of our paychecks, sports talk. So let's talk about college football because pretty exciting weekend in front of us.
There are some extremely good games that are coming up this weekend, and that really builds up into the very first college bowl rankings, which, as many know, are the official bowl rankings. That'll be October 31st for the first one, and then every Tuesday from there on in until the fields are decided. That's the ranking that will take the national championship contenders, and this is the last year for 4 of them. Next year it'll be 12. And the rest of the bowl matchups, they will be decided by that conference. Well, the first rankings will be on October 31st. It'll change markedly as the March goes on. But this week, we have Washington and Oregon playing out in Seattle. And for the late lamented Pac-12 conference, which will crumble apart after this year. That is a huge matchup. These are two nationally ranked teams with Penix and Nix, opposing quarterbacks, both Heisman Trophy candidates. What do you think, Alec? The scoreboard explode out there?
Definitely going to erupt. And, I think this is probably the unofficial Pac-12 championship, because there's a lot of good teams out there. I do think USC can score on anybody, but we saw it took 3 overtimes for them to survive Arizona last week. I think they're going to stumble at some point. I think these are the two best teams out west
and
right now.
Maybe this weekend, because they play Notre Dame.
So that's going to be a tough task for them, and I think the winner of this matchup tonight has a big leg up, and yeah, it's going to be a lot of points. We just saw Bo Nix for Oregon completing 80% of his passes, Penix leading the league in yards per game and yards per attempt, so that ball is going to be flying all over the place.
And by way of comparison, Nix nicked Colorado for 42, I think it was. I think that was final score, 42 to whatever it was. And but 35 of this first half. He could have scored 80 in that game had they allowed that to happen. And Colorado doesn't play Washington this year. So, indeed, you have the makings here for the Golden Buffs to come in and make a name for themselves. They're playing Stanford and should be a 15-point favorite over Stanford, should be able to win that one. I thought that Colorado would win their game over Arizona by more than they did, but 3-pointer with a field goal at the gun. That presents a number of other interesting matchups coming up. Miami and North Carolina. North Carolina is undefeated. Big football game on the ACC. So you have a number of them. Louisville, which is coming off a very big win, goes to Pittsburgh. Pitt is not very good. Notre Dame Southern Cal is, of course, one of the most traditional rivalries in all of college sports, and they get that one on in South Bend, and I believe that's a night game. I'm not 100% sure. Alabama playing Arkansas. Hey, there are a number of them going on.
It's heating up this time of year. You know, you get through a few of those. You get a few early on. Teams are brave enough to put a big-time opponent on the schedule early. But we're getting to the point now where the conference schedule, you can't run from it.
Nope.
You got to play some of these big guys, and it's getting fun.
Texas and Oklahoma both off this week, so they won't figure into the mix. But, again, there are a number of other schools and matchups that are going to be indicative of where the final rankings are going to be.
What do you? What's the over/under on that game? Do you know? USC
the
Washington Oregon game.
Oregon.
Is it over 100?
It would probably be, in all honesty, in the neighborhood of 65 or 70. I would think. Although I must admit to you, I haven't seen it. It's a pick'em game. You don't. There's no. It's the winner who's going to win. There's no point spreader. If there is, it's Washington by 1 or Oregon by 1.
I'm seeing Washington by 3 right now with an over/under at the pitiful 67.5.
Yeah,
wow.
Hit the over would be my opinion on that one. That one's going to be well over.
Coach Prime this week will take his team out to face Stanford.
Stanford, and the game is at Boulder. They're playing at home, yeah.
And so Stanford's usually a very good football team. They're not this year, though.
No, it's very weak football team, and indeed, Colorado should win this one rather easily. Colorado's not a bad team. I don't think they're a great team, but they are good. They can play, and he has some very good talent on there. Coach Prime is doing exactly what he is paid to do by the university, and that's maybe not win all your games, but bring attention to our program, and that he has done, and done it very well.
Who at this point is the best team in college football? Who do you think? Still Georgia?
My opinion, Georgia. Sure. Georgia's very strong. Play Vanderbilt this week, and that's pretty much no contender. Vanderbilt will get out there and hit them, but it won't make any difference because Georgia is that good. I'm looking, in all honesty, guys, for the SEC championship at Georgia-Alabama. I think Alabama will get there. They were maligned by the media because the media doesn't like Saban, doesn't like Alabama. They lose to Texas, and what happened? Oh, it's over. Their dynasty's gone. Hardly. They're a very good football team.
Well, they played some bad teams in between, so that's helped them look a lot better.
I don't know. Texas A&M is pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I'll join the media. I'm not a fan of Nick Saban, not a fan of Alabama. Sorry, Josh Roberts. I know you're probably out there listening somewhere, but no, not a fan of that. Who's your best team in college football? Georgia?
got to give it to Georgia until someone proves you otherwise. When they haven't lost in over 2 years at this point, they have not looked like the Georgia of the last couple of years. I think losing Stetson Bennett, the offense is still trying to find its groove, but top to bottom, that's still a stacked roster. And we've had a lot of teams look really good, but Michigan's looked unbeatable, but who have they played? Ohio State's got a quality win at Notre Dame, but otherwise they're kind of in the same spot. So
and they almost didn't win that.
And that was airtight there. So and then you've got other teams you can say buts about. So I got to give it to Georgia, but the SEC is gonna be theirs to control. But you get to that point where if you keep going undefeated, one loss at the wrong time can entirely derail you in this ranking system, and Alabama took their loss at the right time.
They did. They absolutely did.
Now, who can beat Georgia besides Alabama? Anybody else?
Tennessee. Tennessee could beat them. Tennessee's a very, very good football team. And from there on in, I don't think that they would play anybody. I can't see Missouri. Missouri had them beaten last year in Columbia and let it get away down the stretch. But did they really let it get away? Georgia just woke up. I think that the coaching staff said, hey, guys, get the hell out there and start playing football here. But with Missouri going down to Athens to play, I think the Tigers will show up and play well. But I would be very surprised if they're able to stay in a ball game with the Bulldogs. Georgia's just a very good football team.
What'd you think of the comments from the coach that they played last week who said, Georgia bought themselves some pretty good players?
I think that's the case with a lot of teams. And I see where they're coming from. With the nil, you can make that. The nil supposedly is not supposed to be an enticement for any player. You're not supposed to use that and say, hey, I can give you $100,000 in guarantees from nil. You're not supposed to do that, but come on. How are you going to regulate it? And they do it, and I can understand the criticism behind it.
What do you think, Alec?
I mean, I think I've come on here and said before, I am in full support of these athletes getting something for the revenue they generate for the NCAA. This doesn't happen without them, and this is an absolutely massive machine that profits off of them. So I like to see them get their piece. But however, you got to take the good with the bad, because while I support it, it's a bit of a Wild West at this point. A lot of Alabama just funded a new LLC in the city that's 4 founding members, all of whom are billionaires, and all of a sudden 3 new recruits came for a visit and stayed, and they're driving new sports cars. It's just I will take the bad for what I think is ultimately a good of getting those players paid, but it's going to cause its own issues, and I'm willing to live with it as a viewer, but I know some people will.
And Alec, I really think there's going to be some regulation. I don't like to say this, but I think the government has to get involved in a circumstance like this. I'm going to point out an interesting set of circumstances that occurred this week when University of Kansas basketball was absolved of all wrongdoing, and not of all. That's unfair to say they were absolved of it, but the penalties were denied them. In other words, they didn't have to serve some of the penalties for their discretions in basketball. Well, all that's brought about by a special committee of lawyers who, consciously or not, said, hey, all that they were accused of is legal now. So can we penalize a team for that? That's not supposed to be the case because it wasn't then. But the fact of the matter remains that we live in an altogether different era, and there are so many differences now in what's happening with the recruiting and the enticement of college athletes. Yes, they are being paid. They're being paid enormous amounts, and that really has to stop because these are allegedly amateur athletes. I'm right with you. I think there should be an reimbursement, so to speak, for what they're not student athletes that the NCAA would like to present. They're not. They're different individuals in terms of what they're required to do. Go to class and to play the sport, and that's very difficult indeed.
It's called a scholarship.
Yeah, but how many of them practice that? It's a $10,000 free education per year, and that should be, but it isn't. It isn't enough. And indeed, these players are, they don't have the time to study. They are given 5 years, but over and above that, I agree they should have some reimbursement for what they do, but this is too much.
Weep, weep, weep. I mean, how many people paid their way through college or, to do whatever it is that they do in life? And, just because you're an athlete, are you entitled to more? And my answer to that is no.
Yeah, but think of what they're doing for the college.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Ned Talk continues in a minute. We'll have our picks right after this.
You're listening to Ned Talk. You're listening to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave.
Yep.
Part of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
Just a little bit early there, just a little bit premature. Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave. It's brought to you by The Dive. I'm Patton, and it's that time of the show where we all look like geniuses because we decide the score of the game. And we'll start with you, Mr. Reynolds.
Well, last week we picked a low-scoring game, and it turned out to be the case. It was, relatively speaking, low-scoring. It was 27 to 20. The situation tonight, on paper, it would appear to be a high-scoring Chiefs rout. I think a lot of it depends on how hard the Denver Broncos really want to play, how angry they are. They've lost 15 straight to Kansas City since, 2015, I guess is what the last time they won. And that in and of itself sticks in your pride agenda. And if you have any pride going for you, yes, they'll want to come out there and play very hard. And if that does, if the Broncos play hard, the Chiefs will win by 17, 20, somewhere around there. And Kansas City is just they're just much better than this team. I picked Kansas City to win this one. I'm going to say 40 to 17.
What about you, Alec?
Well, I said I thought there'd be fireworks earlier, and I'm going to hold to that. So I don't know. These division games can be a little funny. I just have a feeling Denver's going to put up some points, but it's not going to be as much as Kansas City can put up. So I am going to go Kansas City 41, Denver 30.
Here's my X factor for this game.
Taylor Swift.
No. No, we almost went a whole show without saying that. Almost, Alec. You ruined it right there.
You didn't tell me that was the game.
Here's my X factor for this game. I think that the Chiefs saw what Miami did and got a lot of attention for putting 70 on Denver. And so I think that that's in the back of the Chiefs' minds as they go into this game tonight. Can we put up a big number on Denver? And I think that they will win the game tonight 56-17. So I'm picking a big number for them.
Well, I thought I was high with 40, and you guys have 41, and you have 56 for the Chiefs. Well, I think that does spell the fact that Kansas City does have the far superior offense and far superior team. Denver may put up some points. It all depends on the nature of the game. But I do think it's a Kansas City win without a whole lot of suspense to it.
I think there's a good possibility in tonight's game that you might actually see the defense outscore the offense. I think there's a possibility that could happen. Next time we are on the air will be next Sunday, not this coming Sunday, but a week from that, when the Chiefs take on the Los Angeles Chargers in another division game. And that game will start at 3:25, so we'll be here at 1 o'clock for Ned Talk. Alec, thank you for being with us on vacation and all.
Happy to be here. I was looking forward to it, and I look forward to retreating back into my cave and doing as little as possible for the last little bit of it.
Ned, thank you as always.
Pleasure's mine, sir.
Thanks to Corbin Campbell, our mad genius, Mike the intern, who runs things around here, Brian Tyndall, who's the boss of bosses. It's Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show. Get set for the Chiefs and the Broncos.